we are going to talk, as I said, about trade and investment in Africa, how we can accelerate growth in African businesses. And before I ask my colleagues on the panel to join me, maybe just a couple of data points to give us a little bit more context. Recently, we've seen a report issued by the UN, World Investment Report, where it was communicated that in 2024, the total foreign direct investment on the African continent increased by 75% to $97 billion. This is fantastic news, by the way. The largest holders of FDI stock on the continent are European investors. On the other side, we also know that there's a lot of trade happening between the EU and Africa. For that matter, the EU is Africa's largest trading partner, collectively. And so it's also its largest export market for Africa. So this is important as we position this panel that we have today. And I have the honor to be joined by very distinguished colleagues. I'm going to now invite to the stage Miguel Azevedo, the Vice Chair for Investment Banking for Middle East and Africa from Citi. Thank you, Miguel. I also want to invite Indira Campos, who is the Chief Resident Representative for the World Bank Group in Cape Verde. Welcome, Indira. Good morning. Nuno Rangel, the CEO of Rangel Logistic Solutions. Thank you, Nuno, for joining us. And Sandra Antunes Buma, who is the Chief Representative for Commerce Bank in Morocco. Thank you very much for all of you. Okay, I'm going to sit on the other side. Let's start with, I hope you all have mics next to you, microphones. Very good. Let's start with the current situation. Miguel, I would like to start with you. How do you see these current geopolitical shifts happening? How do you see this impacting, investment and trade flows between Europe and Africa? Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. If anything, I think actually can be positive in the sense that it forces geopolitical centers to look closer to home rather than far away. So Africa is obviously very, very close to Europe. I think it's happening exactly the same in the fact that I'm now in the Middle East. I'll comment on that. It happens exactly the same between Middle East and Africa, which I think something that is happening over the last few years. So I think the brutal cut of aid from the US to Africa, which is brutal, there's no other word to call it, but I think it can have a second order effect of forcing people to become a bit more realistic, and I think we have all seen that sometimes things could be done better. I think with rates coming down now, and now more on the sort of the financial space, I think the markets are reopening to African issuers, namely the European markets. We have seen, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, for the first time in 7 years, an African issuer tapping into the European capital markets from an equity standpoint. From a debt standpoint, the markets are also reopening. And there's a higher focus on Europe, funds going from Europe into Africa rather than the US. We see less US investors looking into Africa right now. So, sometimes it's a blessing in disguise, forces people to do things differently. And as have been said by everyone, literally everyone this morning, the two continents have to work together. We can then elaborate a bit later, but I think in the infrastructure space, for example, there's where there are things to be done, and maybe Europe can regain the leadership in that process. But I can come back to that later.
Very good, excellent. Sounds like potentially good news for the continent. Indira, if we add to this international context the expected changes coming in the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that is potentially going to create, a single market in the future. How do you see this, bringing more opportunities to African businesses as well as European businesses on the continent?
Thank you, Luis, and good morning, everyone. Very nice to see so many good old friends. Indeed, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to be, when fully implemented, is going to be a game changer for African businesses and any foreign businesses wanting to invest in Africa. The Africa Continental Agreement will connect, first of all, it will be the world's largest free trade zone, and it will connect 1.3 billion people across 55 African Union member states with a GDP valued at something like $3.4 trillion, sorry. It aims to reduce 90% of tariffs on goods. It aims to reduce most of the trade barriers that exist currently. And it's also, and most importantly, it's going to regulate and create a single market for trade, services, and investments across Africa. So the significance of this is not only is it going to boost intra-Africa trade, but it's also going to create a unified, predictable, and competitive market for anyone wanting to invest in Africa. And obviously it's going to turn a fragmented continent into an easier to operate market. So we can foresee European businesses scaling their operations, not needing to go through 54 different trade regimes and scaling their operations operating in one country and then or establishing themselves in one country and then being able to trade and sell their finished product goods across the continent. It's also going to promote greater integration, greater value chain integration of European businesses in Africa. So companies in the pharmaceutical sector, in the agribusiness sector, can easily purchase raw materials or some intermediate goods from one country and add value locally. We can imagine a textile company buying cotton in West Africa, transforming it in North Africa, and then selling it in Africa or exporting it to other markets. One other important aspect that's also been mentioned that this free trade zone will do is it will boost and is already boosting the investments in infrastructure in the continent. And we're seeing this in transport infrastructure, ports, airports, but also digital connectivity. So a lot of opportunities for companies in the construction, in the logistics, in the technology space, and especially those that are willing to come in, invest, and operate these infrastructures. There will be a lot of opportunities in those sectors. And we're already seeing this. We're seeing this. The Lobito Corridor is an example of this with the European Consortium Atlantic Railway. But we're also seeing this with companies like Vinci in operating the airports in Cabo Verde. And finally, services as well. There's the Continental Free Trade Agreement has provisions for liberalizing services and digital services. And so we also expect companies in the telecommunications sector, finance, or professional services to have greater number of opportunities in the continent, especially tech companies with the need for e-commerce, payments, cross-borders, and you name it. So,
very good. Nuno, coming back to you now, indeed I mentioned the need for continued investment in infrastructure. Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will bring more opportunities for trade, not only inside the continent, but also cross-border. And we all know that logistics plays a key role in facilitating all of this happening. Given that you are very much involved in that sector, how do you see the outlook for logistics in Africa going forward?
First of all, good morning, everyone, and thanks to invite me to be again in the EurAfrican Forum. For us, this forum this year is special because the forum is with Angola, and Rangel started the internationalization. The first country we opened after Portugal was Angola in 2007, and that gave us a lot of experience on learning the spirit of Africa. And today we are in 6 countries in Africa. So Angola has a big connection with us, so it's very special to be here today. So talking about the logistics in Africa, the outlook, I think first of all, talking about Africa, always everyone says, okay, the future is in Africa, youngest population in the world, the population is going to double. But for me, I don't think that Africa is the future bet. It's now. It's happening now, and if you are not there, you should be there now. And in the logistics, there is already a transformation, a strong transformation in the logistics sector happening at the moment. So if I can summarize this in three points, I think one of them is the massive investments that are being made in infrastructures and in corridors, and is of course the African trade agreement. These are 2 big points that are connected together. We can give the example of Lobito corridor, but there is others. Second, if you think after COVID, and I think everyone here in the room understands that, there was a huge constraints on supply chains. And a lot of global companies that were not producing in Africa, were not sourcing in Africa. Now they are thinking on alternatives, so that these constraints that happen in the supply chain cannot affect them in the last 5-6 years. So I think we see that new companies coming for sourcing a lot of raw materials, but also to look into the countries to start to invest and to think about production in Africa, because they want to do the diversification of their sourcing. And the third point, I think in the world is happening, there is a digital transformation of the logistics. And what is happening in the world with the digital transformation in logistics is happening in Africa. I always say the same thing. Rangel, the digital solutions that we offer to our customers in Europe, the quality of service that we offer to our customers in Europe, we offer the same in Africa. There's no difference. So I think these 3 points are what is trending in the supply chain. And of course, we need to see that this is a start, and the logistics is very important for the trade. Logistics is going to be the enabler to grow the trade. I think is a very important point. And of course, that after COVID, a lot of people start talking more about supply chain, logistics, and that became to have someone in the board that takes care of the supply chains. In Africa, this is even more important. So a strong logistics will make you grow faster.
Very good, excellent. Sandra, turning to you now, and trying to be a bit more pragmatic, we see there's opportunities, geopolitical shifts that may generate opportunities. There's a trade framework that is going to help increase trades. There's positive perspective on investment in infrastructure, but there's bottlenecks, there's limitations. Coming from a very large European institution that has been operating on the continent for a long time, what do you think are the biggest bottlenecks, and how can we expand the trades between the EU and Africa, in your perspective?
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you so much for the invite. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. So yes, there are a lot of opportunities, and I think, as my colleagues have said, the opportunity and the bet is not on the future, is actually today. So it's really exciting to see so many people join the conversation this morning and generally in similar fora in the last 24 months. I think there are challenges, and this is something that anyone who actually works on the continent is very aware and very much trying to address. However, they impact African companies far more than what people can imagine. And I think there's a few ways to cut it out. Firstly, as importers, one has to understand that in Africa, most of the companies are actually smaller than what we're used to seeing in the global fora. And I think this impacts in ways that basically are about just day-to-day operations, access to information, access to knowledge, and also digital solutions is something that is a big impediment in people being able to actually trade across. And when I mean trade across, I don't just mean trade with Europe or other international partners. It also is trade within Africa, and this is why the free trade area is something that is going to help. However, there are more to development of trade within and outside of Africa than just the regulations around new areas. There's obviously, as far as importers go in Africa, there's the risk appetite of international banks, and this is why I'm always interested to see banks who are taking a view on Africa and are actually implementing this through local presence. It is very difficult to have a view and to really understand the economies in Africa if you are sitting somewhere like New York or London. It is important to be based locally, to have local knowledge, so that you're able to understand that when you talk about Angola, you're not talking about Nigeria. Sometimes people get confused, similar commodities, however, the two countries have nothing to do with each other. And if you don't understand that, then you're not able to offer the adequate trade finance instruments that might help companies in those countries trade within Africa and also with partners outside of the region. So we've talked about access to trade finance solution, which is extremely constrained for smaller companies, which make up more than 90% of the market locally. There's also, I think, something that we tend not to understand sitting on this side of the Mediterranean, the constraint represented by FX. So when you trade in Africa, most times you trade in dollars. That's all very nice and good when you're an international player, but when you're an African company, when you're an African SME, it is actually really difficult to have regular access to FX and to have a view over the stability of how much that FX is going to cost you. So this also gets in the way of these players being more active on the international trade scene. I think we also need to think about African countries and African companies as exporters. So we see them a lot, including at Commerzbank, we see them a lot as importers. But I also happen to sit on the board of the RDC subsidiary of Equity Bank. And this has allowed me to see them as exporters. So obviously Congo is a big exporter of commodity. And what you do see is exactly the same. Again, access to FX, access to information, the ability to really design solutions that are going to help them serve international players, but also scale up. And finally, I just want to mention, and I think this is important since we broached upon the free trade area agreements, I think it's important to understand why that is going to be a crucial development. Regional trade within Africa is minimum. So to give you a sense, Africa represents about 3% today of the global trade, depending on who you read, between 3 and 5%, and the growth of Africa's portion of global trade has reduced since 2021. However, it is 17% of the global population. Trade within Africa is actually less than 20% of the Africa trade. So Africa trades mostly outside. So, for instance, I heard stories during my time when I was in Johannesburg as part of the World Bank Group about companies importing chickens from Brazil in Africa. And I used to be extremely surprised. I mean, I used to say, well, why are we importing chickens when there are plenty of poultry in this continent? Why don't you import them from another African country? And the main reason for that is, again, the lack of reciprocity in regulation and tariffs, the lack of infrastructure. I mean, how are you going to transport their poultry? It's probably easier to bring it from Brazil in a ship than to actually put it in a train that doesn't exist. So that kind of development really is going to help. There are infrastructure gaps that are being addressed, and I think they need to be further accelerated. So I'll pause here. I think I gave you a few challenges, but we all here are quite encouraged.
Very good. Well done. And I want to pick on one specific word you mentioned, which is tariffs. Miguel, I want to go back to you, just following up on your first remarks on geopolitical shifts. You know, this Trump administration tariffs framework, you know, how do you see this impacting business on the continent? Is it good? Is it bad?
I think it's irrelevant. You know, there's not a lot of exports from Africa into the US. The few that there used to be is commodities and primarily oil, not anymore. So it's irrelevant in my view. What is not irrelevant is the second order effect of the tariffs. And that is, I think, again, can be seen, trying to put an optimistic hat, can be seen as a blessing in disguise. Because if you have oil trending lower, as I think it will be for the next few years, you basically forcing some countries to come back to reality and to do something different. We have spoken about Angola and Nigeria as two oil-driven economies. I take the example of Nigeria. I think what's happening in Nigeria over the last 12 months is remarkable. And it's basically moving away from oil. And it's a template for what we need to see, and the fact that the world is becoming less global, it may actually help Africa in this sense. And so, you know, when you look at trade in Africa, as has been said, you know, many times, it's all about how much you can do domestically these days. Domestically meaning continent-wise. You know, the chicken from Brazil is just cheaper. It's massively cheaper. That's the only problem. In Nigeria, they produce some chicken, but it's very expensive to produce for all the reasons that were said. So, you know, forcing local trade, I think it will be good for Africa. And the fact that everybody is now a bit more focused on finding new partners and moving a little bit away from the US, I think it will be good for Africa. As I said before, what is also very relevant is that for the first time, when you have an increase in uncertainty, risk premium goes up, rates go up, the first one to suffer is Africa. Has been like this for the last 50 years. For the first time is not this time. Spreads on African sovereigns have been shrinking. Rates for African issuers have been shrinking. The market is open. This is quite a unique opportunity, I find, for Africa right now, because capital is available. It was not available for the last 3 years. You know, Nigeria has not tapped international equity markets for 7 years. It did a few weeks ago. So it's quite a unique opportunity, but now we need governments to get their act together. As always, I always say that Africa is a tug of war between macro discount and micro premium. The micro premium is the companies we find in Africa, right, which are amazing. The macro discount is the poor management of the macro, economically, politically, and socially. I think there are green shots of hope these days, and so the world being tougher is probably a good idea to get their act together.
Thanks. Indira, maybe just to follow up on what Miguel was mentioning, you know, we need to attract more capital into the continent, and looks like the pools of liquidity are available. You know, is there a way we can continuously de-risk, you know, these investments to be able to attract more capital?
Indeed. I mean, there is no, how do you
There's no miracle.
Exactly, but there, you know, from the perspective at
no
least,
magic wand.
No magic wand, that's what I was trying to look for. But obviously, we've discussed, I will not repeat the immense potential that Africa has. At the same time, and I think it's a fact, and it's also been discussed by everyone here, Africa is still perceived as a high-risk market for political reasons, for regulatory uncertainty, for currency volatility, for limited access to data, you name it, infrastructure gaps, obviously, and we need to recognize that this is still the case, right? And so from the perspective of an organization like the World Bank Group, de-risking investments in Africa is going to be a combination of different things. Number one, political reforms, scaling innovative or risk mitigation type of financial instruments, continued investment in infrastructure, continued investment in human capital, and also in data. So, you know, when you take policy frameworks, governments need to continue to prioritize to streamline business processes and ensuring that contracts can be enforceable so that you can actually attract foreign investment. And countries like Rwanda, but also Côte d'Ivoire, Egypt, they're the trailblazers of this reforms, and this is resulting in a lot more investment into these countries. At the same time, international financial institutions need to continue to scale instruments that help attract investment into the country. And forgive me if I'll use the platform to discuss the instruments we have within the World Bank Group. But blended finance is one of them, combining public and concessional financing with private capital to help de-risk investments in sectors or in areas that are priority for us. And here I'll mention climate, I'll mention food security, SME development, any investments in fragile states, and in health. So companies have available to these instruments to invest more into these areas. There are obviously also non-commercial guarantees or insurance, such as the political risk insurance that MIGA, which is also part of the World Bank Group, offers. And these political risk guarantees offer protection to investors against expropriation, civil disturbance, or currency inconvertibility. And again, another type of instrument that companies sitting here today can also look out for. And then obviously there's a lot more other types of credit enhancements, such as partial credit guarantees, that can have also a particular, that can be crucial, especially for infrastructure projects and other types of productive investments in Africa. De-risking will also means continued investment in infrastructure. I think we've all mentioned that, and here transport, energy, digital infrastructure, very important. And in this case, we as the World Bank Group, we really push for PPPs, so private sector entities that are willing to invest and operate these infrastructure, very important for the content. And, you know, again mentioned market data, insights, also very critical for companies who are looking to invest in Africa. Here again, academia is very important, so it's good that we're here at Nova today, but research on Africa needs to continue. And the World Bank Group is also playing a role in that, in producing a lot of core analytics that are available publicly, both for governments, but also for private sector. And then finally, we need to continue to build capacity, strengthening institutions to enforce contracts, very important for private sector investing in Africa, and last but not least, investing in skills and education for obviously anyone operating in Africa will need talent, and so it's important that we continue.
Thank you. It was quite a long list of available instruments, and sometimes I realize that capital is available, instruments are available, but we struggle to get these instruments, closer to who actually needs them. So any opportunity we have to, sell out these opportunities for companies is a good opportunity. We heard our keynote speaker from the EurAfrican Bank mentioning also the support that they are giving to the continent. All of you are working with institutions, credible institutions that are supporting the continent with solutions. We have the African Development Bank also doing a lot. I guess, maybe we need to do a bit more to get it, to the companies that actually need them, and help simplify sometimes the complexity of these products and the time it takes for companies to access, and this coming from a bank as well, so I know how difficult it may be sometimes. Nuno, we know the instruments are available, but which countries? I mean, which countries do you think are the most attractive right now from a trade and logistics, business perspective on the continent?
Okay, I will talk first on the countries where we are and the countries where we are studying, because we believe are the best. Of course, the game changer is where is the trade corridors and where is the big ports. That's the countries that are more interesting. So first of all, talking about South Africa, still South Africa is a hub in the Southern Africa. Very strong demand and with a very important port that is Durban. So South Africa is there, is still the most well-positioned and with the biggest trade for the logistics. Then we can start talking first about Angola. I think Angola has a huge potential for two main reasons. One is, of course, the Lobito corridor that everyone knows and can connect the DRC and Zambia goods to the world, and this is very, very important. The second is the new airport in Luanda. I already visited the airport before it was open. It has all the conditions to be a big regional hub in Africa. I think people are not aware, but to move air cargo in Africa is very, very difficult. Sometimes there is better connections and faster to go to Europe and come back again to another country in Africa. So there is a big potential market there to connect the countries in Africa. And not only Africa, for example, Luanda can be a hub to connect the world to Brazil. Of course, there is the need not only the airport, but of course to have strong airlines that can go to that airport and connect in Africa and connect to the world. Talking about other countries where we are, of course there's a potential for Mozambique in the future, especially because it connects the Indian Ocean. Another country where we are that is important for logistics and some people don't know about it is Zambia. Zambia is in the middle, no? So why is so important for logistics, no? Because in the end, they has no ports. But the question is that Zambia can connect several ports. So Zambia is a connection to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, to Mozambique, to South Africa, to Namibia. And another detail that some people don't know, still one of the constraints of the transportation in road is the license of the truck. If a truck is from South Africa, it can connect South Africa to other countries. But for example, a truck with a license of South Africa cannot do a transportation from Zambia to Tanzania. So Zambia is in the middle, so a lot of fleets are there. So because it's more easy, they can connect all these trades, all these countries with the same truck. So Zambia is important for the road transportation. Then talking about other countries, of course, I touched Tanzania. We are in Tanzania. Tanzania has a very important port, Dar es Salaam, and it's very important not only for Tanzania, but to connect the countries, especially Rwanda, Burundi, even Zambia. Talking about countries where we are not, and I think there is some potential. One is going to probably be Namibia, especially because they can be in the future a very important strategic fuel storage in Namibia. So it's a country where we are looking on it. Another one is Kenya. I think Kenya connects the Indian Ocean and is a very important country, and I think it can be a very important country too, and we are looking on that. Talking in other countries that are far away for our strategy, but I believe is important. One of them is Ivory Coast. I think Ivory Coast has huge potential. They are doing big investments to grow the port. The capacity of the port is going to grow 50%. They are investing in terminals. And it's an interesting country for logistics. So it's one of the countries I believe.
Well, there's a lot of potential there apparently, and you just mentioned a few countries. So, Sandra, coming back to trade finance, to make this whole happen, how can we help companies access trade finance? You've mentioned some challenges, some bottlenecks. Is there a way we can help facilitate access to trade finance?
Sure, thank you so much. No, I'm very disappointed. You didn't mention Morocco, my other home country. You should come visit. We'll have a look together. No, but back to trade finance. I think a number of actors, both from the private sector as well as the development finance world, work together to really unlock the potential for trade finance for Africa and other regions that need development in that front. And I think that is absolutely key. And to be honest, I think one of the important starter points is information. When you are a large corporation in Frankfurt, typically you are very well aware that if you want to sell goods, let's say to Senegal, you can use a letter of credit. It will be issued by a local bank, and then an international finance institution that you are comfortable with will confirm it, and you will know that basically your risk is mitigated, but also the importer in Senegal will then have an easier transaction from a cash flow perspective. They do not have to pay right away before the goods have actually made it to their place of delivery. And I think that is all well and good. The problem becomes when you're actually a smaller company, a smaller trader, let's say in Nairobi. Typically, access to information and knowledge of the potential options is relatively lower at that level. And hence, you find yourself having to really do an education of the traders, of the companies, so that people are well aware. I think here as well, something that is a constraint and that is being addressed is, again, trying to assess the risk of each market, of each product individually. And this is one of the constraints of trade finance is every single transaction is very specific. It is specific to the goods or services that we're talking about. It is specific to the importer, the exporter. And so it requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise. And so here, I think, both commercial financial institutions and international DFIs have an absolute mission to do in educating the players on both sides of the equation to make sure that people understand the options available, how things work, but also understand the implied costs of it, because that is still, something that comes in. Because oftentimes when you say to someone, well, let's trade with a company in another region, people will tell you, well, it's extremely expensive because the costs of the various financial institutions in between actually comes in. And that is where risk assessment is important. And I think financial institutions who are very well entrenched in the countries tend to have a lower price to the same type of products as companies or banks who do not necessarily have a local presence. And this is why I personally, having covered financial institutions, I think Diogo Lacerda will know this, for more than 20 years, I'm always very excited to see the development of African financial institution groups. And I think that is important. Why? Because if you have a company like Standard Bank who actually knows the financial market, but also the corporate market in markets as different as Egypt, Sudan, and South Africa, they are able to offer much more bespoke and tailored solutions because they know the companies on both ends. In terms of the risk mitigation solutions that were offered, and I'm just going to do a little plug to my ex-employer, but knowing that this is also something that is offered elsewhere. When you trade in Africa, typically most counterparts, be them financial institutions or exporters, will see a higher risk. We all agree with that, and will hence include a higher price. What you do get from financial institutions in the multilateral space, like Afrexim, AFDB, EBRD, IFC, is that they do have trade risk mitigation platforms, which when you do have banks in Africa and in Europe who are both part of the mechanism, actually enable the access to trade finance to be multiplied and to be extended to partners who might not necessarily have been aware of them, but also might not have necessarily had access had they been just their own risk. So there, a plug to you, Indira. You're welcome.
Well done. Thank you very much. We're going into our last round of questions and maybe focusing on the future. Miguel, you are sitting in, probably one of the most significant capital flow shifts happening in the last few years. Middle East is now a lot more active, looking at the continent as well. You work for an American bank, a very large American institution. What is your strategy for Africa, and how do you see, the outlook for trade and investment on the continent?
Yeah, okay, first Middle East. I think it's very relevant, very keen to do more in Africa, to tap into some of the commodities. There's a massive project in Abu Dhabi to actually invest in commodities and then, funny enough, take them back to Abu Dhabi to store them in Abu Dhabi. So I think we will see more of this. I think we will see African companies listing in Abu Dhabi and Dubai stock exchanges. We are working on 2 transactions around that. I think that will be a game changer. So, there's a lot more to happen. Middle East is very liquid these days, so that's a refreshing new source of capital. Going back to more institutional or sort of more market-driven sources of capital, I think banks like us, what we aim to do is basically to provide access to capital markets. The real heroes in Africa these days, I think, are banks like Afrexim Bank, Trade Development Bank in East Africa, African Finance Corporation in West Africa. These are the institutions that are making capital available, and banks like ourselves is basically we help them connect and fund themselves on a wholesale basis. The other focus that we are keep fighting is to finding good stories to bring outside, and to bring outside to private capital, to bring outside to public capital. There's never a shortage of good stories. As I said before, the problem is when the macro is not working, and that brings the market, it's totally closed. I think we are now starting a new cycle that is positive, and we are also seeing something very interesting, which is some multinationals abandoning Africa because it has been tough over the last few years, and local entrepreneurs funding themselves in the international capital markets to buy those businesses. We are seeing this, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Egypt. That's also good, I think. It will create a new breed of companies that can access the capital markets and sell the story. So I'm a practitioner. I don't go much more, beyond that. All I need is a good story and the government not to mess too much.
Very good. Well done. I thought you were going to talk about being more aggressive than JP Morgan, but we'll leave it for another time. Indeed, you've also been involved for a long time in Africa's economic transformation in different multilateral institutions. How do you, what makes you feel encouraged about what's happening? What progress do you see as positive today?
So, taking back to the Durão Barroso's words and how he was inspired by coming from Cabo Verde. So I'm based in Cabo Verde. So I think I'm very inspired by Africa's trajectory. Africa has made remarkable progress in the last few years, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, despite the geopolitical disturbances, despite the climate change and you name it. And what makes me particularly optimistic is that this progress is driven by bold reforms that governments are making. It's driven by an attempt to manage macroeconomic, to make good macroeconomic decisions. It's driven by innovation, and it's driven by the resilience of Africa's people, Africa's young people. And so collectively, they're turning the continent into a growth opportunity for all of you sitting here today. So when we talk about things that make me optimistic, the implementation of the free trade agreement is one of them. The growth in the digital economy, which is expected to reach 180 billion by 2030. I'm optimistic as well, because when I see the efforts to diversify and make these economies more resilient, and how these economies are trying to be less dependent on the one thing that the continent was known for, which is obviously it's still known for, but exports of raw material and commodities. You spoke about the surge of FDI in the last year alone, 75% growth in FDI. Again, showing that companies and investors are looking at Africa with different eyes, and I'm particularly encouraged as well by the innovation and the growth for the engine of growth that is in Africa's young population, which makes up 70% of the population. So while I recognize that there are a lot of challenges ahead, we're seeing businesses, communities, governments really striving and working together to make to turn the page on Africa's story. And so maybe I'll end, since this is probably my last intervention, I'll end with a plea, right? So to the African decision makers and policy makers that are here today, do continue to invest in infrastructure to make the climate more, to make the investment climate more attractive to investors. Do continue to invest in education, and do continue to work towards the integration of the continent. To the Africa's partners that are here, the bilaterals, the multilaterals, the academia, do continue to support that effort through, scaling the instruments, the financial instruments that we discussed here, but also through research, through technical assistance, through capacity building. And finally, to the businesses that are here today and that are looking to either invest or expand in Africa, do look at Africa, do look at the opportunity that both these financial instruments, but also the trade area is going to open up. but look at Africa as not just a market, but an opportunity to partner in the growth of the continent that's going to transform not just Africa, but the way our interconnected world works. So, thank you.
Well then, Nuno, you are a foreign direct investor on the continent. As you've mentioned, you are in multiple markets and looking to expand, which is great. If you were able to influence policy, what would you ask of the governments or decision makers to help facilitate trade and accelerate investment on the continent?
I think I will ask what almost everyone asks, but
not FX.
I think we need predictable rules. We need to know the rules. That's very important. We need that the corridors are working well and fast. We need smart financing. That's very important. So going into that, if we think about predictable rules and we talk about we need the African trade agreement has to be harmonized between the countries. Especially when we're talking about the cross-border in Africa, this is very important because you just to give an example, we go from Durban to Lubumbashi in DRC and from Lubumbashi back to Durban, and this takes by road 30 days, but half of the time we are stopped. So, and time is capital, time is money, so we need to fix some things so we can get faster. And just to have an idea, we take 30 days, but we at Rangel, we have small office in each border with our own people to get faster. We have this KPI, how many time, how many minutes, how many hours, how many days the trucks are stopping each border. And we have our own people to try to focus to pass the trucks from the border. So if we facilitate this to be faster, we can gain a lot of time, and gaining time, we gain capital. No? Then I think we need to focus, if we are choosing some trade corridors, we need to focus on that trade corridors. We need to focus on doing multimodal transportation, and I think that should be the best policy to try to focus on these important corridors. For example, like the Lobito corridor, because the Lobito corridor, if it's working well, it can unlock a region. It can unlock Angola, DRC, Zambia, so it's a big potential. And then financing. I think financing has to be more accessible. Everyone knows that in Africa the interest rates are very, very high. So if you need to financing locally, you have a very, very high interest rates. The multilateral institutions, they always are looking for the big projects, the ports, the terminals, the corridors. But we need to understand that there is other things around, And we need to invest in warehouse, we need to invest in people, we need to invest in fleet. And it's very hard to invest and grow fast if we have a very expensive financing, And if we have this expensive financing, of course, the logistics is going to be more expensive. So I think the multilateral institutions, the banks, they need to start looking not only for the big projects, but what can unlock and what companies are going to work with these big infrastructures, because so these infrastructures, if to work well, they need all the support of these companies. And for last, of course, we need to invest in people. Big infrastructures, big fleets, but if we won't invest in people and in IT systems, we are not going anywhere. Of course, the IT systems is easy because we bring it what we have, but people is not so easy. So we need to hire people, train people, invest in people, so we can have the best people. So that is that. I think the logistics can grow if there is these points, we can work these points. I just want to, because it's my last time, I just want maybe to bring a big challenge to the Portuguese government. I think we need to look more for internationalization. We are always talking about internationalization, but in the end, the support we give to the companies are to export goods, is what we do. I think people sometimes are not aware of that. We talk about internationalization, but all the financing support that there is for the companies is for exports. And I think the Portuguese government should look on ways to support Portuguese companies that want to internationalize to Africa. So what I mean is you go there and you open your company, you go there and you open your factory. And people that are thinking on this vision, on the long-term vision, on the big potential of Africa, well, I think the government should think about, maybe with Banco de Fomento, to try to see what they can unlock to support these companies. Because until today, what we are supporting is exports. And I think we need to think different, and we need to go there and invest there and to open the companies there, open our factories there, or open our companies there. And it's what we are doing at Rangel. We are opening our operations there. We are a Portuguese company, but operating totally like a local company. So thank you very much.
Very good. Well done. And Nuno, I think that's so important, because if you speak to any African government, they will tell you that they're looking to diversify, obviously, their economies. They're looking to attract investment, because with investment comes employment creation, comes knowledge transfer, and that's a lot more impactful in GDP growth than just trade, right? So, well done. Sandra, coming back to you, just to finalize, we talked a lot about lots of things today. I mean, which sectors? We talked about countries, we talked about, the frameworks, legal frameworks, bottlenecks, trade finance specifically, but which sectors do you see are having more activity and more potential or opportunity for financing on the continent? And any other remarks you would like to?
Sure. I can see the timer in front of me, so I'm not going to take
It's not ready yet.
It's not just yet. Look, you have to think of where is Africa today versus where it was 20 years ago. It's made a lot of stride, and some countries more than others. But I think the key here is to climb up the value chain. At the moment, a lot of countries in Africa are raw material exporters, and that means that basically certain countries will export the base materials that are required to make renewable energy batteries, and then they will re-import those batteries again. So to me, one of the sectors that has the greatest potential in Africa is renewable energy, and basically moving from being the raw material exporter to actually being a part of the value chain that is involved in the actual production of the products that are going to be critical to energy transition globally and not just in Africa. So that's my first sector, and in this I'm thinking about countries like DRC. I'm also thinking of countries like Morocco, which has actually started that climb up with the opening of the first EV battery factory up in the north of the country near Tanger, actually, with exactly the will to produce for local, but also to export. Agriculture, to me, is also a sector that is absolutely critical in being developed in Africa, and that is for two reasons. One is because, frankly, everything grows in Africa, and sometimes if you're in some parts of the continent, you tend to forget that because you have to go into a supermarket. Let's say if you're in Tunis, you have to go into a supermarket and you end up seeing that you're importing a lot of the products that you're buying, which again is well and fine. It's cheaper, maybe. However, I would guarantee that you would create more job opportunities if you would to import those, let's say, from another African country than from a country in Europe. And I think here, basically, it's about moving, a continent from small farmers' tissue into something that is more around agribusiness. So again, there are opportunities here, and you do see a lot of companies actually cling on to that sector because it is absolutely key in the food security of the region, but also it does offer great economic development opportunities. Infrastructure, I think we talked about many times during this panel. That's the third sector that I would say is seeing a lot of investment and a lot of opportunity over the next few years. I moved back to my home country of Morocco about 2 years ago. It's an open sky chantier, as we say in French. It's a construction site everywhere you go. From airports to roads to factories to trains, everything is being built. It's a little bit messy, but I trust in 5 years we will all be very happy about that transformation. But what that gives is, it gives opportunities to investors. International companies are constantly flying in and out of the country, but it also gives the opportunity to develop trade within and outside of Africa. So I think that is a sector that is quite critical. And then finally, talking to the youth of the population, technology is a game changer, and you do see that technology is actually one of the biggest trade imports in Africa. And to me, it's important that it gets more investment in the region. Sorry, not the country. There's more than 55. For two reasons. One is obviously it's what is extremely consumed, but also from an education and health perspective, it absolutely transforms how you actually run a school, a university, a hospital. And so those, I would say, 4 sectors would be my picks. Thank you so much.
Excellent, very good. So it's clear, first of all, thank you very much for your contributions. I think you've left a lot of insights for the audience to reflect upon. I think that, as Nuno mentioned, the time is now. The opportunity is today, not in 10 years. There's a lot of opportunities on the continent. I hope that you can invest more in finding out the good stories that are happening on the continent, that you are able to, in this conference, to engage with other, members of the panel today here, find out also from the financial institutions what opportunities are there, what instruments are available for you to increase your investment into the African continent. And with this, I'd like to close our panel. Thank you very much. I hope it's been interesting. Thank you.